When Gary first approached me about getting involved with this conference, and I looked at some of the information that was available on it, there was something that jumped out at me, was this theme of trying to link global context to local action. And as Lynn mentioned, when I worked with various New South Wales agencies for many years, a lot of the analytical tools that we developed were very much aimed at trying to help people make decisions at landscape or local scale. Since I've been at CSIRO, a lot of my work has shifted up a couple of scales, and we now do a lot at global scale. And so this really intrigued me as a possible topic to talk about here. At a global scale, there's a lot going on. We've had much of that mentioned, the Global Biodiversity Framework, which will hopefully get bedded down at COP15 in December this year. We've got things like the High Ambition Coalition that's been mentioned, the Leaders' Pledge for Nature, and the Nature Positive movement. And there are lots of other activities at global scale. UNCEAR ecosystem accounts have been mentioned, the Task Force for Nature-related financial disclosure, and the list goes on and on. But as we all know, for any of these big global goals and ambitions to ever be achieved, it relies on actions that actually get carried out largely by people at landscape or local scales. The old adage, think globally, act locally, comes to mind. But Gary Tabor used another term this morning that I really liked. What was it? Bottom-up solutions to global problems. This is still on 14 minutes, so I hope it is going, or maybe I hope it's not going.
Sorry, I need to come and get my hands changed from before pages that one.
Okay, I'll knock off a couple of minutes. All right. Good. All right, special hand signals, great. Won't it be wonderful when we don't have to show a first draft of the Global Biodiversity Framework goals and targets from more than a year ago, and we actually have final wording for these things. But anyway, this is the way it is. Connectivity, as I think Gary Tabor mentioned earlier, connectivity is mentioned within several goals and action targets within the draft Global Biodiversity Framework, but it's important to note that there is no single goal or target focused exclusively on connectivity. So connectivity is always in there as just one of multiple components or multiple factors that need to be considered within any given goal or target. And to make things even more complicated, there are all sorts of interlinkages and dependencies that link up these multiple goals and targets. So this is like another kind of connectivity. So that with something like ecosystem integrity and connectivity that I've highlighted there, that's going to be influenced by actions undertaken across multiple targets relating to things like spatial planning, restoration and protection. And then in turn, changes in ecosystem integrity and connectivity are going to influence outcomes in terms of persistence of species and genetic diversity. So, whoops, one too many. So how do we make all of that work properly? How do we ensure that actions that are implemented under the action targets, often at more local scales, are actually being informed by and contributing to outcomes that people are thinking of more at national and global scales? And so this is, I should have said on the previous slide, that diagram that was in there was from some expert input that a group of us provided to the CBD's post-2020 process. This was a group put together by Future Earth and Geobon. And another aspect of that advice related to the use of indicators. I'll just grab a drink of water here. What Virginia called earlier, I think, metrics for success, which is a term I really like as well. But the message we were trying to get across to the CBD process was that often people think of indicators as just being used in a relative passive way for monitoring outcomes. So in other words, the assumption is that countries will go off and do good things out in the environment, and indicators are used just to monitor the extent to which that is moving the system towards the achievement of goals and targets. But what we're trying to get people to see more is that indicators have this other really important role to play, which is to actually inform the actions themselves. So to help people to identify and prioritise actions that are going to move the system most effectively and efficiently towards the achievement of the outcomes under the goals. And what I want to do today is talk about one particular indicator that we've been working on for a while now in CSIRO, that is the Bioclimatic Ecosystem Resilience Index. It's a mouthful, it's not a very good name. We just call it the berry. And it's an indicator that measures the capacity of landscapes to retain species diversity in the face of climate change as a function of the area, integrity and connectivity of natural ecosystems. And so we developed this originally, we were commissioned to develop it by the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, hosted by UNEP-WCMC, and it was developed originally to address a gap at that time in available indicators for monitoring achievement of the CBD's Aichi targets. This indicator is now just recently included on the CBD's list of proposed headline indicators for monitoring progress against the forthcoming Global Biodiversity Framework. It's been suggested as an indicator for monitoring progress in relation to Target 8, which many of you would know as the climate change related target of the framework. Whoops. Okay, I did have some animation here. We won't worry about the animation. What does this berry indicator do? This is just a cartoon representation of it. But to cut a very long story short, if you think of, a lot of connectivity analyses essentially just operate in geographical space, whereas this is an indicator that looks at connectivity in both geographic and environmental space, and also considers connectivity over time. So basically, if you imagine in this simplified representation that we've just got a transect across the landscape, and so that's geographic space, the x-axis there, the y-axis is an environmental variable, for example, temperature, and then you can imagine that over time the relationship between geographic space and that environmental variable is going to change. So that's the dashed line there rather than the solid blue line. And so what this indicator is all about is analysing the extent to which that the species that are associated with any given location are going to be able to access suitable habitat under the future climate. And that's all done factoring in consideration of the dispersal capacity of the particular species group of interest and the environmental tolerances of those species. In actually implementing this, it's of course much more challenging and complicated than that, because geographic space has two dimensions. Therefore, we need to think about things like least cost path analysis when we're looking at dispersal potential. Environmental space has multiple dimensions. It's just not temperature on its own, it's precipitation, soil attributes, and so on. We also need to deal with the fact that habitat quality isn't just a binary thing. It's habitat or not habitat. It's condition or integrity is important. And we also need to deal with the uncertainty of future climates. So the analyses that we use to drive this factor all of those considerations in. The indicator was originally developed and applied just to the moist tropical forest biome globally, and this was applied at 1 kilometre grid resolution across the planet. And when you look at how this plays out at particular locations, you can really see this interesting interplay between the influence of things like climate velocity on the one hand and habitat connectivity on the other. And if we have a time series of change in habitat extent and integrity, say from remote sensing, we can then assess the change in this indicator over time. As we've done here, we've aggregated up here to ecoregions. These could be countries or any spatial unit of interest to actually assess that the change in the capacity of landscapes to retain biodiversity in the face of climate change is a function of changing habitat extent and condition. So we've now actually extended this indicator to cover all terrestrial biomes globally, and we've made the results available for public access via various portals and dashboards. Okay, for this, great, thanks. For this to be useful at the scale at which planning decisions actually have to be made, it will often need to be applied at a much finer spatial resolution and incorporating better quality information at national or subnational scale. And so we've done some work recently, a couple of years back, with our good colleagues in New South Wales. Many of you would know Michael Drillsma and Jamie Love there. And so we've applied this approach within New South Wales. Something I wanted to pick up on here, Brendan mentioned earlier the adaptation and mitigation nexus, which I thought was a really nice term. I've learned a number of really nice new terms here today. But just very briefly, these are some results for IBRA bioregions within New South Wales, summary results of what this indicator is saying at this scale. And what you'll see there for each bioregion, the blue part of that bar, excuse me, the blue part of the bar is telling us what the capacity of landscapes within that bioregion have to retain biodiversity in the face of climate change. The brown part indicates the potential to improve that capacity by going out and improving the integrity and connectivity of habitat within that bioregion. So there's obviously a lot of potential there in most of those bioregions to improve the capacity of that system to retain biodiversity. But then worryingly, the grey part is basically indicating the rest of that capacity that can only be addressed through mitigation rather than adaptation. So it just underlines what Brendan was saying earlier about the importance of coupling both mitigation and adaptation. So am I out of time? So I'll just put that one up. Again, the big challenge now with applying this indicator is to start better linking up that monitoring of outcomes to planning of actions, and to start applying this indicator at more landscape scale rather than global scale. Sorry, sore throat. And this is something that we've done a lot of before. Lynn gave some examples earlier as well. So I'll leave it there, but think globally, act locally, or bottom-up solutions to global problems. Thank you.